I always thought being a good neighbor meant staying respectful and stepping in when someone needed a hand. But to Eleanor Prescott, the president of our local HOA, it meant clinging to every minor rule in the 39-page neighborhood charter, a document she'd read it and expanded herself several times since taking over. I moved into Crestwood Pines a year and a half ago, drawn in by its clean streets and stable property values. The realtor casually mentioned an active homeowners association but reassured me they were fair-minded people focused on upkeep. Maybe that had been true before Eleanor's reign began. During my first week, I received a welcome packet from the HOA. It included a laminated rulebook, 3 blank violation forms, for convenience, and a handwritten note from Eleanor, encouraging me to attend the next board meeting. Out of curiosity, I went. Big mistake. For 2 solid hours, Eleanor lectured on acceptable grass blade length and presented samples of permissible neutral tones for house trim. For the first year, I kept a low profile and followed the rules, dodging her persistent suggestions about my front yard. But everything changed after I replaced a broken mailbox, courtesy of a careless delivery truck. Eleanor showed up the next morning, voice shrill and eyes narrow. "That mailbox doesn't comply with Section 8, Paragraph 2 of our design standards," she said. "All mailboxes must be approved by the Aesthetic Compliance Panel." I had already reviewed the rules. They said nothing about mailbox designs, only that they should be well maintained. I pointed this out. Her face soured like she'd bitten a lime. "That's the outdated version," she said with forced calm. "We updated our standards last month. I'm certain you received the email." I hadn't. 3 days later, a thick packet showed up in my mailbox. 15 pages of specifications. Mailbox height, materials, color tones, even the type of numbering allowed. My new one broke at least 6 of these standards. A sticky note was attached. 14 days to replace with compliant model, EPC. Suspicious, I started digging. According to HOA bylaws, any new standard had to be voted on by the full board. After some friendly chats with neighbors, I discovered no such vote had happened. Eleanor had created the document herself. At the next HOA meeting, I raised my concerns. Eleanor waved a hand dismissively. The panel gave verbal agreement. Formal documentation is pending. The rules are valid. Several homeowners murmured support for my point, but Eleanor quickly moved the agenda along, burying the issue. 2 weeks later, a violation notice appeared on my door. $5 a day until I swapped the mailbox. It was signed by the entire panel. Later, one panel member confessed Eleanor told them I had already agreed and just needed encouragement. I filed a formal appeal, copying every board member and citing the bylaw sections requiring official votes and proper notification. That must have hit a nerve. The next morning, Eleanor showed up with 2 board members in tow. "We reviewed your appeal," she said with icy courtesy, "but the mailbox sits on HOA-controlled curbside property. We can enforce compliance without a vote." I stayed calm. "Then I'll be consulting an attorney." Her eye twitched. "That seems a bit extreme for a mailbox. We're simply preserving aesthetics. If these rules are valid, I'll comply. But they must be properly adopted." One of the board members, a retired CPA named Greg, awkwardly cleared his throat. "Maybe we should revisit the approval process next meeting, just to be thorough." The look Eleanor gave him could have melted glass. She left with a terse, "We'll be in touch." The following week, I flew across the country for work. My home security system, motion sensors and cameras, sent alerts directly to my phone. I didn't think about the mailbox situation while packing. Midway through a presentation, I got a motion alert. I checked my phone discreetly. There she was, Eleanor, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize, tampering with my mailbox. I immediately called my neighbor Todd. "Someone's messing with my mailbox right now. Can you check?" "Already watching," he said. "They just showed up." On my security feed, I watched Todd walk out and approach them. Even without sound, Eleanor's animated arm movements and the ever-present rulebook in her hand said it all. Todd stood firm, pulling out his phone as Eleanor waved a printed document in his face. What she didn't know was that if the system detected tampering and I didn't respond within 30 seconds while away, it would notify local authorities. When one of the men started prying at the mailbox post, the sensor triggered. Minutes later, I got a call from the police. They were at my home and had encountered Eleanor and company mid-removal. "Would you like to press charges?" the officer asked. I thought of months of HOA nonsense. "Yes, I have video proof, and no one had permission." When I got back 2 days later, my original mailbox was back in place, thanks to Todd, who had saved the unauthorized model as evidence. 3 voicemails from Eleanor awaited me. The first, stern and commanding. The second, threatening legal action. The third, past midnight, was mostly a ramble of insults and frustration. I forwarded the footage, voicemails, and documentation to both the police and my lawyer. He issued a cease and desist letter to Eleanor in the HOA, citing state laws and bylaw violations. At the emergency HOA meeting that followed, attendance hit record levels. Residents who had quietly endured Eleanor's rule came forward with their own horror stories. Eleanor walked in late, holding her precious binder and followed by a visibly sweating attorney. She tried to take her usual seat. "You won't be chairing tonight," Greg said. "You've been temporarily suspended pending investigation." "This is outrageous," she barked. "Everything I did was for the good of this neighborhood." "That mailbox was an eyesore," Greg calmly responded. "The standards weren't approved, and you entered private property without consent. That's illegal." My lawyer presented the footage, violation of process, and the police report. The board voted unanimously. Eleanor was removed from her position, ordered to pay the HOA's legal fees, and required to issue formal apologies to affected residents. She stood, face flushed with disbelief. "You can't do this. I've given everything to this place. Raised property values. She pointed at me, voice shaking. "You made an enemy tonight." With a dramatic swirl, she stormed out, her attorney scurrying behind with her armful of policy papers. The room was silent for a beat. Then someone chuckled. Then applause. Finally, the HOA had reclaimed its neighborhood, not through rebellion, but by demanding the rules apply to everyone. Eleanor's perfume lingered, but her tyranny was over.